Eleanor Thompson stood in her kitchen, the scent of lemon cake curling through the air like a warm hug. At 85, her hands weren't as steady as they'd been, but they still knew their way around a mixing bowl. She baked the cake from scratch, George's favorite, the recipe she perfected over decades. Today was her 85th birthday, and she planned a party to bring her family back together. Mark, Sarah, Lila, her son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter, they'd all come. They had to. The kitchen was a riot of color. Red and gold streamers dangled from the ceiling, catching the late morning light through the window. Balloons bobbed against the glass, their strings swaying in the breeze from a fan. On the dining table sat a hand-stitched tablecloth, her mother's, its edges frayed but still vibrant with embroidered roses. Ellie smoothed it with her palm, feeling the years in its threads. She'd spent weeks planning this, invitations mailed, calls made, even a text to Lila, though she doubted the girl checked her voicemails. "Don't be late," Ellie had said, her chuckle masking a quiet ache. She adjusted a photo frame on the counter. Her and George at their 50th anniversary, his arm around her like a promise that never broke. 10 years gone, and the house still felt hollow without him. His laugh used to fill every corner, loud enough to drown out the creak of the old oak floorboards. Now the silence was a guest that never left. But today she'd changed that. Today the house would hum again. Laughter, stories, maybe even that old record player George loved, spinning Sinatra's smooth voice. Ellie checked the clock above the sink. 10:30 a.m. The party was set for noon. She'd invited 12 people: Mark, Sarah, Lila, a few cousins from out of town, and neighbors who'd become family. Mrs. Callahan from next door, who always brought her watery fruit salad. Cousin Ruth, who talked too loud but meant well. Ellie had dusted off the good china, the set she and George bought after Mark was born in 85. It felt right, using it today like a bridge to the past when family gatherings were a given. She moved to the dining room, setting out plates with care. Each one clinked softly, a sound that took her back to Sunday dinners when Mark was small, his tiny hands reaching for mashed potatoes, his giggle infectious. She smiled, then faltered. Mark hadn't visited in months. Work, he always said, his voice clipped on the phone. Sarah was busier still, always rushing to some meeting, her texts polite but brief. Lila was the only one who called sometimes, her voice bright but distracted, full of teenage slang Ellie barely understood. She got it, life moved fast. But today they'd slow down. They'd sit together, eat cake, maybe dance like she and George used to under the porch light. By 11 o'clock, the house was ready. Ellie slipped into her best dress, a soft blue that George said matched her eyes. She pinned her silver hair up, a few strands escaping, and dabbed on a touch of rose-colored lipstick. In the mirror she saw a woman who'd lived, wrinkles like a map of joys and sorrows. She'd raised a son, loved a man, built a life in this small suburban town. Today she'd remind them all what family meant. She checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. She'd called Mark last week, left a voicemail for Sarah, texted Lila twice. They knew. They'd come. She set out a pitcher of iced tea, the glasses sweating in the July heat. Outside, the street was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. Ellie hummed a tune, "Fly Me to the Moon," and arranged a tray of sandwiches, cucumber and cream cheese, just like her mother used to make. She glanced at the clock again. 11:45. Ellie walked to the living room, where the record player sat on a walnut stand. She lifted the lid, brushing dust from the vinyl. George had loved this thing, always playing records after dinner, pulling her into a clumsy waltz. She slid a Sinatra album from its sleeve, the cover worn from years of handling. Maybe later she'd play it, get Mark to laugh like he used to. She set the record down, not yet ready to break the silence. Back in the kitchen, she checked the cake. Perfect, golden, the lemon zest bright against the white frosting. She'd made it for George every year, even after he was gone. This year it was for her, for them all. She imagined Lila sneaking an extra slice, Sarah scolding her gently, Mark telling some overblown story from work. The thought warmed her, pushed back the quiet. She opened the back door to let in some air. The garden stretched out, her pride and joy. Roses in full bloom, tomatoes heavy on the vine. George had built the trellis, his hands calloused but gentle. She'd tended it alone since, a way to keep him close. Today she'd show Lila the roses, Teach her how to prune them right. The girl needed roots, not just screens. At 11:55, Ellie stood by the front window, peering out. The driveway was empty, the mailbox flag still down. She adjusted a balloon that had drifted too close to the fan. Maybe they're running late, she thought. Mark's always stuck in traffic. Sarah's probably on a call. Lila's glued to her phone. She sat at the head of the table, the chair creaking under her slight frame. The table was a masterpiece. Cake in the center, plates gleaming, napkins folded into neat triangles. She waited, her hands folded in her lap, the clock ticking toward noon. The clock struck noon, the soft chime echoing in the empty house. Ellie straightened in her chair, eyes on the door. Any minute now, she thought. The street outside stayed quiet, no hum of car engines, no crunch of gravel. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, the ice clinking too loudly in the silence. She sipped, the sweetness sharp on her tongue, and glanced at her phone again. No notifications. No texts. Nothing. She thought of 1965, her 25th birthday, when George threw a surprise party in their tiny apartment. Mark was a baby then, giggling in his high chair as neighbors crammed in, spilling beer and stories. George had kissed her forehead, whispered, "Ellie, you're the glue." She'd felt it then, like she held the world together. Now the world felt loose, unmoored. She dialed Mark's number, her fingers slow on the screen. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Mom," she said, her voice steady at first. "Just wondering where you are. Party's started." It cracked on the last word and she hung up fast. Maybe they forgot, she thought, then shook her head. No, they wouldn't. She'd reminded them. Hadn't she? She replayed the conversations in her mind. Mark's distracted. "Yeah, Mom, sounds great." Sarah's rushed. "I'll try." Lila's cool, Grandma. They knew. She stood, pacing to the window, her blue dress brushing her knees. The street was still empty, the sun high and unforgiving. At 12:30 she cut a slice of cake, the knife trembling in her hand. The lemon scent hit her hard, too full of George. She set the slice on a plate but didn't eat. She walked to the living room, where the record player sat waiting. She lifted the needle, let Sinatra's voice spill out. "In other words, hold my hand." She swayed, alone, her shadow dancing on the wall. She remembered Mark at 10, helping her bake for George's birthday, licking the spoon, flour on his nose. Now he was 40, a stranger in a suit, always rushing. She stopped swaying, the music too loud now. She turned it off, the silence rushing back. She thought of calling Sarah, but what would she say? "Did you forget me?" No, too desperate. She tried Lila instead, picturing the girl's bright eyes. Voicemail again. "Lila, honey, it's Grandma. You coming?" She hung up, her chest tight. By 1 o'clock, the balloons seemed to sag, their helium tiring. Ellie sat again, staring at the empty chairs. She remembered Mark at 18, storming out after a fight, swearing he'd never need her again. He'd come back, always did, but each time he drifted further. After George died, Mark promised, "I'll take care of you, Mom." She'd believed him. Now the promise felt like air. She walked to the kitchen, where a small radio sat on the counter. She turned it on, needing noise. A local station played, the announcer's voice cutting through. "Big news today, local exec Sarah Thompson's rumored to be eyeing a major international role." Ellie froze, the name jarring. Sarah? Her Sarah? She shook her head. Probably another Sarah Thompson. Still, the words lingered, a puzzle piece she couldn't place. She returned to the table, her tea now warm, the ice melted. She thought of George's 60th, the last big party they'd thrown. The house had been packed, Mark, Sarah, little Lila crawling under tables. Ellie had felt alive, needed. Now she felt like a ghost in her own home. She traced the tablecloth's roses, her mother's handiwork. "You'd know what to do," she whispered, as if her mother could hear. At 1:30 she stood again, restless. She checked the garden through the back door, the roses swaying in the breeze. She planned to show them to Lila, teach her how to care for them. Maybe that was silly, Lila was all screens and earbuds. Still, Ellie had hoped. She closed the door, the lock clicking too loudly. She dialed Mark again. Voicemail. "Mark, it's Mom. I'm still here. You coming?" Her voice was softer now, less certain. She hung up, her hands shaking. She thought of Cousin Ruth, her loud laugh, but even Ruth hadn't called. No one had. The realization hit like a wave. They chose not to come. She'd spent her life giving meals, advice, love, and now on her 85th she was invisible. Ellie sat at the head of the table, the cake untouched, its frosting glistening under the chandelier. The plate stared back, empty, accusing. She folded her hands, the skin thin and spotted, and let her mind wander. She saw herself at 30, balancing Mark on her hip while stirring soup, George stealing a kiss as he came home from work. She'd built this life, this home for them. For moments like this, only now there was no them. She thought of the sacrifices, the nights she stayed up sewing Mark's Halloween costumes, the years she worked part-time at the library to pay for his college. She'd never asked for much, just their time, their presence. She remembered Sarah's wedding, how she'd helped plan it, sewing table runners late into the night. Sarah had hugged her, called her mom. Now Sarah's texts were one-word replies, if they came at all. The radio droned on, the announcer's voice cutting through again. Sarah Thompson, local business star, may be headed to London for a game-changing role. Ellie's heart skipped. It was her Sarah. London. She hadn't mentioned anything. Ellie's mind raced. When had they last talked, really talked? Christmas, maybe over a rushed coffee. Sarah had been on her phone, half listening. Ellie had let it go like always. She stood, needing to move. She walked to the mantel where photos lined up like a timeline. Mark's graduation, Lila's first birthday, George's retirement party. She touched the frame of their 50th anniversary, her and George smiling, unaware he had only 3 years left. She'd been the glue, he'd said. Now she felt like a thread unraveling. She returned to the table, cutting another slice of cake, though she still couldn't eat. The lemon scent was too much, too tied to George's laugh, his hand on hers. She wrote a letter in her mind, something she'd done since he died. George, they didn't come. I tried so hard. She imagined his voice steady. Give him time, Ellie. They'll see. But time was the one thing she didn't have. She thought of calling Ruth, but pride stopped her. They knew. They chose this. She sat again, the chair creaking. The balloons were lower now, grazing the table. She remembered Lila at 5, tugging at a balloon string, giggling as it floated back up. Lila was her spark, the one who might still see her. But even Lila hadn't come. The radio crackled again, mentioning Sarah's name, but Ellie turned it off. She didn't want to know, not yet. She wanted to believe they were just late, stuck in traffic, caught up in life. She rearranged the napkins, straightened a fork. The table was perfect, but it felt like a stage with no actors. She closed her eyes, picturing the party that could have been. Mark telling a story, Sarah laughing, Lila sneaking cake. She'd planned to give Lila her old locket, the one George gave her when Mark was born. It was in her pocket now, heavy with meaning. She'd wait a little longer. Just a little. A knock at the door startled Ellie, her heart leaping. She stood, smoothing her dress, and hurried to open it. Mrs. Callahan stood there, her gray hair in a bun, holding a bowl of her infamous fruit salad. Ellie, happy birthday, she said, her voice warm but cautious as she glanced past her. Where's the crowd? Ellie forced a smile. Running late, I guess. She stepped aside, letting Mrs. Callahan in. The older woman set the bowl on the table, her eyes scanning the empty chairs. They'll come, she said, patting Ellie's arm. You've got a heart bigger than this town. They sat for a moment, Mrs. Callahan filling the silence with a story about Ellie's kindness, how she'd brought soup when Mrs. Callahan's husband died, how she'd organized a block party years ago that everyone still talked about. Ellie listened, a spark of pride flickering. She wasn't invisible here, not to the neighbors. Mrs. Callahan didn't stay long. She had her own errands, but promised to check in later. You call if you need me, Ellie. The door closed and the silence returned, but it felt softer now. Ellie walked to the mantel again, picking up a photo of Lila as a toddler, her cheeks smeared with frosting. She smiled, the ache easing slightly. She returned to the garden, needing air. The roses were vibrant, their petals catching the afternoon light. She touched one, remembering George's hands in the soil. She'd kept this garden alive, just like she'd kept the family together. Maybe she still could. She clipped a rose, set it in a vase on the table, a small act of defiance against the emptiness. She sat again, her resolve hardening. She wasn't done yet. She'd wait, but not forever. She thought of the locket in her pocket, the story she wanted to tell Lila. She'd find a way to reach them, even if they didn't come today. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dining room, Ellie sat with her tea now lukewarm. The cake sat untouched, the balloons sagging further. She'd stopped checking her phone, stopped pacing. She'd wait until 6 o'clock, she decided, then pack it all away. She'd eat the cake herself, maybe share it with Mrs. Callahan tomorrow. She thought of George again, his voice in her head. "You're stronger than you know, Ellie." She'd survived worse. His illness, the long nights after, the way the world seemed to shrink without him. She could survive this. She stood, ready to start clearing the table, when another knock came, sharp and sudden. Her heart jumped, hope flaring despite herself. She smoothed her dress, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and walked to the door. She hesitated, her hand on the knob, afraid of another disappointment. But the knock came again, insistent. She opened the door, the fading light spilling in, and stood there breathless, waiting to see who'd finally remembered. Subscribe to this channel. Sarah Thompson leaned against her office desk, the glass walls of her corner office reflecting the buzz of the city below. At 38, she climbed the corporate ladder faster than most, her name a quiet legend in the tech firm's sleek headquarters. It was July 12, 2025, and the air was thick with possibility and pressure. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, emails piling up, but today wasn't about routine. Today, her boss, Karen, had called an urgent meeting, and the rumor was big. An international role, London-based, with her name on it. Sarah adjusted her blazer, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun. She glanced at the photo on her desk. Her, Mark, and Lila at a beach vacation 3 years ago, all smiles. She hadn't smiled like that in months. Work had consumed her, deadlines bleeding into weekends, leaving little time for Mark's complaints or Lila's teenage mood swings. And Ellie, God, when had she last called Ellie? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the meeting. Karen strode in, all sharp heels and sharper eyes. "Sarah, you're our pick," she said, no preamble. "VP of Global Strategy, London office. 6 figures, full relocation package. You'd start in September." Sarah's breath caught. London. A new city, a new life. She dreamed of this, leading teams across continents, proving she could do more than manage regional accounts. But Mark and Lila, uprooting them would be chaos. And Ellie, alone in her suburban house, would be left behind. "It's a lot to consider," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Karen nodded, handing her a folder thick with details, salary, benefits, timelines. "Take 24 hours. We need an answer by tomorrow night." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing. She'd worked 15 years for this moment, but the cost felt heavier than she'd expected. Back at her desk, she opened the folder, skimming the numbers. The salary was double her current pay, enough to secure Lila's college fund, maybe even retire early. But Mark's job was here, tied to the local hospital. And Lila, already struggling with high school, would hate starting over. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Lila. "Can I skip math tutoring?" Sarah sighed, typing a quick "No, you need it." No reply. Typical. She thought of Ellie's voicemail from last week, something about a party. Sarah had meant to call back, but a client crisis had derailed her. She'd assumed Mark handled it. Ellie was his mom after all. She opened her phone, scrolling for Ellie's message, but another email from Karen popped up. "London's waiting, Sarah. Don't miss this." She closed her eyes, the weight of the choice pressing down. The office hummed around her, colleagues typing, phones ringing, the coffee machine hissing. Sarah remembered her first day here, 22 and nervous. Ellie sending her off with a homemade lunch and a hug. "You're gonna shine, Sarah," Ellie had said, her blue eyes warm. That was before the promotions, before the late nights, before Sarah started missing Sunday dinners. She shook off the memory, focusing on the folder. London was her future. She'd figure out the family part later. By noon, she was in another meeting, pitching to a client while her mind split between the deal and the offer. She glanced at her watch, 12:15. Ellie's party was probably starting, if she'd heard the voicemail right. She'd call after this, she promised herself. But the client meeting ran long, and by 1 o'clock, she was buried in revisions, the party slipping her mind. She didn't know that across town, Ellie sat alone at a decorated table, waiting for a family that wasn't coming. Sarah's world was contracts and ambition, not balloons and lemon cake. She typed a quick email to Karen, asking for details on the London housing package, her fingers moving on autopilot. The choice was already taking shape, even if she hadn't said it out loud. At home, Lila sprawled on the living room couch, her phone glowing with a video she wasn't really watching. The house was quiet. Mark was at the hospital, Sarah still at work. Lila's math textbook sat untouched, her tutoring session looming like a punishment. She scrolled through messages, ignoring her mom's text. She didn't get why they were so obsessed with her grades. She wasn't failing, just bored. She stood, restless, and wandered to the attic stairs. She'd been meaning to find her old sketchbook, buried in boxes from their last move. The attic was a mess. Dusty crates, forgotten furniture, and a stack of photo albums she'd never noticed before. Curious, she pulled one down, its leather cover worn soft. She opened it, expecting baby pictures of herself, but found black and white photos of a younger Ellie, laughing with a man who must have been Grandpa George. Lila sank to the floor, flipping pages. Ellie in a sundress dancing at a picnic. Ellie and George cutting a wedding cake. A young Mark, gap-toothed, holding a fish on a dock. Lila smiled, the images pulling her in. She'd always thought of Grandma Ellie as just old. But here was a woman who'd lived, loved, maybe even partied. There was a photo of Ellie at a birthday, maybe 25, surrounded by people, her smile bright. Lila's chest tightened. She hadn't called Ellie back about the party today. Had Mom? Downstairs, the phone rang, but Lila ignored it, lost in the albums. She found a letter tucked in one, Ellie's neat handwriting to George. You make every day a celebration. Lila's eyes stung. She barely knew her grandpa. He died when she was 5, but she remembered Ellie's stories, how she'd light up talking about him. Lila pulled out her phone, thinking to text Ellie, but stopped. What would she say? Sorry I forgot your birthday? Across town, Sarah sat in her office, the London offer weighing heavier. She opened her phone, finally listening to Ellie's voicemail. Sarah, it's Ellie. Party's at noon, hope you can make it. The date hit her today. She checked the time, 2 p.m. Her stomach dropped. She'd forgotten completely. She dialed Ellie, but it went to voicemail. Ellie, I'm so sorry, she started, then stopped. What could she say? She hung up, guilt clawing at her. Sarah remembered her first year with Mark, how Ellie welcomed her like a daughter. Sunday dinners at Ellie's house, the table groaning with food, George's bad jokes filling the air. Sarah had felt like she belonged. But after Lila was born, work took over. Promotions came, but so did distance. Ellie's calls became less frequent, her own fault as much as Sarah's. She rubbed her temples, the London offer folder staring at her. She couldn't think about the party now, she had to focus. Back in the attic, Lila found another album. This one newer. Photos of her as a baby, Ellie holding her, smiling like she'd won the world. Lila's throat tightened. She hadn't been to Ellie's in months, maybe a year. She thought of the party, the one she'd brushed off. Was Ellie waiting alone? The thought made her stomach twist. She texted Sarah. Did you go to Grandma's party? No reply. Typical. Sarah's phone buzzed with Lila's text, but she was on a call with Karen discussing logistics. The London team's eager to meet you, Karen said. Sarah nodded, her mind half on Ellie. She'd make it up to her maybe tomorrow. But the guilt lingered, sharp and insistent, like a splinter she couldn't pull out. By 3 p.m., Sarah was in a boardroom presenting to the executive team, her voice steady but her mind fractured. The London offer was a done deal in all but name. She'd verbally agreed to consider it seriously, her ambition overriding her doubts. But Ellie's voicemail played in her head, a quiet accusation. She checked her phone during a break. No messages from Ellie, just Lila's text about the party. Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't told Mark, assuming he'd handle it. Had he forgotten too? At home, Mark stumbled in from a 12-hour shift. His scrubs wrinkled, his eyes bleary. He tossed his keys on the counter, noticing Lila in the attic doorway, albums scattered around her. What's this? He asked, frowning. Lila held up a photo of Ellie and George. Grandma's life, I guess. Did you go to her party today? Mark froze. Party. His face fell. Oh God. I forgot. Lila's eyes narrowed. You both forgot? It's her 85th, Dad. Mark ran a hand through his hair. guilt hitting him like a wave. He'd meant to call Ellie, but a patient emergency had derailed him. He dialed her now, but it went to voicemail. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We'll come by soon, I promise." He hung up looking at Lila. "We messed up." Across town, Ellie sat in her dining room, the cake untouched, the balloon sagging. She'd turned off the radio, the silence better than false hope. She thought of calling Mark again, but her pride held her back. They'd chosen work, phones, life over her. She stood, starting to clear the table, her movements slow. The locket in her pocket felt heavier, meant for Lila but ungiven. Sarah left the office at 5 o'clock, her head pounding. She drove home, the London folder on the passenger seat, Ellie's voicemail looping in her mind. She called Mark, her voice tight. "Did you go to your mom's party?" Mark's silence was answer enough. "I forgot," he admitted. "Work was insane." Sarah's jaw clenched. "We both forgot, Mark. She's alone." The weight of it settled between them, a shared failure. At home, Sarah found Lila still in the attic, photos spread out. "You didn't go either," Lila said, her tone sharp. Sarah winced. "I know, honey. I got caught up." Lila held up a photo of Ellie at 40, vibrant and laughing. "She's not just some old lady, Mom. She's a..." Sarah's eyes stung. She'd forgotten more than the party. She'd forgotten Ellie's place in their lives. Ellie, meanwhile, sat in her garden, the rose she'd clipped wilting in its vase. She thought of George, his voice urging her to keep going. She wasn't invisible, not yet. She'd find a way to reach them even if it hurt. She clutched the locket, her resolve hardening. Lila sat cross-legged in the attic, the albums a window into a life she barely knew. She found a photo of Ellie and her at a park, Lila maybe 7, both laughing on a swing. She remembered that day. Ellie pushing her higher, telling stories about her own childhood. Lila's chest ached. She'd ignored Ellie's text about the party, too caught up in her own drama. Now she felt small. She texted Ellie. "Grandma, I'm sorry I missed your party. Can I come over tomorrow?" She waited but no reply came. Ellie was probably asleep or too hurt to answer. Lila clutched the photo, an idea forming. She'd go to Ellie's, bring the albums, ask about the stories behind them. Maybe it wasn't too late. Sarah downstairs stared at the London folder. The job was everything she'd worked for, but the cost was clear now, Ellie's empty table, Lila's accusing eyes. She remembered Ellie's kindness when Lila was born, how she'd stayed up nights helping with feedings. Sarah had promised to stay close, but work had pulled her away. She dialed Ellie again, leaving a longer voicemail. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. I'll come by tomorrow, I promise. We'll make this right." Mark joined Sarah in the kitchen, his face drawn. "We screwed up," he said. Sarah nodded, her voice soft. "We did. But we can fix it." They really talked for the first time in months. Mark admitted he'd been avoiding Ellie, scared of seeing her without George. Sarah confessed her guilt over the London offer, unsure if she could take it now. Lila overheard, her heart sinking. London? They were moving? No one had told her. She clutched the albums tighter, feeling unmoored. Ellie was her anchor, the one constant. She resolved to visit her, with or without her parents' permission. She'd bring the photos, make Ellie smile again. Ellie, in her garden, felt her phone buzz but didn't check it. The stars were out and she talked to George in her mind, his voice steadying her. She'd wait for them but she wouldn't beg. She'd lived 85 years, she had stories to tell, love to give. She'd find a way. Sarah woke early the next morning, July 13, 2025, her mind made up. She wouldn't decide on London until she saw Ellie. She called work, taking a personal day a rarity. Mark agreed to join her, canceling a shift. They'd go to Ellie's, apologize, make it right. Lila insisted on coming, clutching the photo albums like a lifeline. At Ellie's house, the dining room still bore traces of the party. Streamers drooping, plates stacked in the sink. Ellie was in the garden, pruning roses, her movements slow but deliberate. She'd seen Lila's text, Sarah's voicemail, but hadn't replied. She needed them to come to show they cared. Sarah drove, the London folder left at home. She thought of Ellie's face at their wedding, beaming as she danced with George. Sarah had promised to be family, but she'd let ambition win. She glanced at Lila in the back seat, flipping through photos. "You're right about her," Sarah said. "She's us." Lila nodded, a small smile breaking through. Mark gripped the wheel, his guilt heavy. He remembered Ellie's strength after George died. How she'd kept the family together. He'd failed her yesterday, but he wouldn't again. He thought of the locket Ellie mentioned in her voicemail, meant for Lila. He'd make sure she gave it. As they pulled into Ellie's driveway, Lila spotted her in the garden, a lone figure among the roses. She grabbed the albums, heart pounding. Sarah and Mark followed, their steps tentative. Ellie looked up, her blue eyes sharp but guarded. The air was thick with unspoken apologies, the weight of yesterday's absence. Sarah stepped forward, her voice soft. "Ellie, we're here." Ellie nodded, setting down her shears. Lila held out the albums, her voice small. "I found these. Can you tell me about them?" Ellie's face softened, a spark of hope flickering. The chapter ended with them standing together, the promise of reconciliation hanging in the air, fragile but real. Please subscribe this channel to get more stories. Eleanor Thompson woke on July 13, 2025, the morning after her 85th birthday, to a house that felt too quiet. The dining room still bore the scars of yesterday's empty party. Sagging balloons, a lemon cake untouched under its glass dome, plates stacked in the sink. She stood in her blue robe, her silver hair loose, staring at the tablecloth with its embroidered roses. The silence was louder than ever, a reminder of the family who hadn't come. She'd seen Lila's text last night, Sarah's voicemail too, both full of apologies. Mark had called as well, his voice heavy with guilt. But words weren't enough. Ellie had spent weeks planning, hoping to pull them back together, and they'd left her alone. She wasn't angry, not exactly, anger took too much energy. It was the hurt that cut deeper, the feeling of being invisible to the people she'd lived for. She brewed coffee, the familiar drip grounding her. Yesterday, she'd waited until 6 p.m., then cleared the table, wrapping the cake in foil, folding the napkins away. Mrs. Callahan's fruit salad sat in the fridge, a small kindness in a sea of absence. Ellie sipped her coffee, the mug warm in her hands, and thought of George. He'd know what to say, how to fix this. "Go to them, Ellie," she imagined him saying, his voice steady. "They're lost, but you're not." She set the mug down, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't wait for them to come to her. She'd go to Mark and Sarah's, see their faces, hear their reasons. She wasn't some fragile old woman to be pitied. She'd raised a son, buried a husband, kept a garden alive. She pulled on a cardigan, grabbed her purse, and checked her phone. No new messages. Fine, she thought. I'll make them see me. The drive to Mark's house was short, just across town, but it felt like crossing a chasm. She passed the community center, where banners advertised a summer fair today. She'd helped organize it years ago, back when George was alive, when the town felt like an extension of her family. Now it was a reminder of how much had changed. She parked in Mark's driveway, the house modern and neat, so different from her own creaky home. She knocked, her heart pounding, unsure who'd answer. Lila opened the door, her dark hair messy, a photo album tucked under her arm. "Grandma," she said, eyes wide. Ellie managed a smile. "Thought I'd drop by, honey." Lila stepped aside and Ellie walked in, the air thick with the scent of coffee and something unspoken. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to understand. Mark appeared from the kitchen, his scrubs swapped for a t-shirt, his face pale. "Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday," he started, but Ellie raised a hand. "Not now, Mark. Where's Sarah?" He hesitated, then nodded toward the living room. Sarah was there, laptop open, papers strewn across the couch. She looked up, startled, and stood. "Ellie, I messed up." Ellie sat, her purse in her lap, her blue eyes sharp. "I waited all day," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I want to know why." The room went quiet, Lila clutching the album, Mark shifting uncomfortably, Sarah's face crumpling with guilt. Ellie waited, ready for answers, ready to build a bridge. Lila sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the photo album open in front of her. Ellie's visit had caught her off guard, but it felt right, like the pieces of a puzzle clicking together. The album was the one she'd found yesterday, full of Ellie's life, black and white photos of her and Grandpa George, young and laughing, mixed with color shots of Mark as a kid. Lila had spent the night flipping through them, each image pulling her closer to her grandmother. "Grandma, look at this one," Lila said. pointing to a photo of Ellie in a polka dot dress, dancing at a picnic. Ellie leaned forward, her face softening. That was 65, my 25th birthday. George threw a surprise party. Half the town showed up. Her voice was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of yesterday's hurt. Lila's stomach twisted. She'd ignored Ellie's text about the party, too caught up in her own world. Sarah sat on the couch, her laptop closed now, the London offer folder tucked out of sight. She watched Lila and Ellie, guilt gnawing at her. She'd spent the morning drafting an email to Karen, her boss, hedging on the London job. The offer was a dream, VP of Global Strategy, a chance to lead on a world stage, but seeing Ellie now, her resolve wavered. She remembered Ellie's kindness when she and Mark were newlyweds, how Ellie had sewn curtains for their first apartment, how she'd made Sarah feel like family. Tell me about this one, Lila said, flipping to a photo of Ellie and a young Mark fishing. Ellie smiled, her fingers tracing the image. Mark was 10, thought he'd catch a whale. Ended up with a minnow and cried when we threw it back. Mark laughed, a rare sound, but his eyes were heavy. I remember that. You made me pancakes after to cheer me up. Ellie nodded, her smile fading. You used to come to me, Mark. What happened? The question hung in the air, sharp and raw. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words stuck. She'd been so focused on work, on the London offer, she'd let Ellie slip away. Lila broke the silence, holding up another photo. Ellie holding baby Lila, both smiling. You looked happy here, Lila said softly. Ellie's eyes glistened. I was, honey. You were my joy. Lila's heart ached. She'd been so wrapped up in school, friends, her phone, she'd forgotten how much Ellie mattered. The albums were a reminder. Ellie wasn't just her grandma. She was a woman with stories, love, a life Lila wanted to know. Can you tell me more? Lila asked, scooting closer. Ellie nodded, her voice steady. Always, Lila. Anytime you want. Sarah watched, her guilt deepening. She thought of the London offer, the life it promised, but also the life it would leave behind. Ellie's question to Mark echoed in her mind. What happened? She'd let ambition pull her away, but seeing Ellie and Lila now, she felt a tug back toward family. The living room felt smaller as Ellie's question lingered. Mark shifted, his hands in his pockets. Mom, I didn't mean to miss your party. It's been crazy. Ellie's eyes narrowed. Work's always been crazy, Mark. You still found time for Sunday dinners when your dad was alive. Her voice was calm, but the hurt was clear, a blade wrapped in velvet. Sarah spoke up, her voice shaky. Ellie, I forgot too. I was at work, got caught up in a big project. She hesitated, the London offer a secret she wasn't ready to share. Ellie looked at her, her gaze piercing. You both forgot. Lila too. I sat there waiting, thinking you'd come. Do you know what that feels like? Lila's eyes dropped to the album, her fingers tight on the pages. Mark sat beside Ellie, his face drawn. I should have called, Mom. After Dad died, it's been hard to come back here. Everything reminds me of him. Ellie's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. I lost him too, Mark. But I'm still here. I needed you yesterday. Sarah's chest tightened. She thought of Ellie's table, the cake, the balloons, all prepared with love, all ignored. We'll make it up to you, she said, but the words felt hollow. Ellie shook her head. I don't want promises, Sarah. I want you to show up. The room went quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. Lila broke the silence, her voice small. I'm sorry, Grandma. I don't know, distracted. But I want to know you like in these pictures. She held up the album, her eyes earnest. Ellie reached for her hand, squeezing it. You're here now, honey. That's a start. Sarah watched, her mind spinning. She thought of the London offer, the deadline looming. She'd meant to tell Mark last night, but the party fiasco stopped her. Now with Ellie here, the move felt like a betrayal. Ellie, she started then stopped. Should she tell her? Not yet. She needed time to decide. Mark stood, pacing. We'll do better, Mom. I promise. Ellie looked at him, her eyes tired but hopeful. I've heard promises before, Mark. Show me. The conversation shifted, Ellie sharing a story from the album to ease the tension, but the air remained heavy with unspoken truths. Later that day, Ellie drove to the community center for the summer fair, needing air after the confrontation. The fair was a tradition she'd helped start decades ago, a celebration of the town's spirit. She parked, the lot buzzing with families, vendors, and laughter. The banners fluttered, one reading in honor of Ellie Thompson, a surprise from the organizers. Ellie's heart lifted. She wasn't invisible here. Mrs. Callahan spotted her, waving her over to a booth selling pies. "Ellie, you're the star today," she said, hugging her. Mr. Reynolds, the retired librarian, joined them, reminiscing about Ellie's years volunteering. "You kept this town together," he said, his eyes kind. Ellie smiled, the words a balm after yesterday's hurt. She wandered the fair, greeting familiar faces. A young mother thanked her for a recipe shared years ago. A teenager mentioned her garden tips. Each story reminded her of her impact, the roots she'd planted beyond her family. She thought of George, how he'd loved these events, always sneaking an extra slice of pie. She missed him, but the community's warmth filled some of the void. Back at Mark's house, Sarah sat with Lila, the albums still open. "Grandma's kind of amazing," Lila said, showing Sarah a photo of Ellie organizing a town cleanup. Sarah nodded, her guilt resurfacing. She'd forgotten Ellie's strength, her legacy. The London offer felt heavier now, a choice that could sever those roots. Mark joined them, his mood lighter after Ellie's visit. "She's tough," he said, smiling. "Always has been." Sarah agreed, but her mind was on the folder at home. She needed to talk to Ellie to understand what leaving would mean. She texted Karen, asking for another day to decide, her resolve wavering. At the fair, Ellie sat on a bench watching kids play tag. She thought of Lila, her spark of curiosity, and felt hope. The confrontation had been hard, but it was honest. She'd laid her hurt bare, and they'd listened. Maybe that was the bridge, truth raw and real. That evening, Sarah drove to Ellie's house, Lila in tow. Mark stayed behind, promising to join later. Sarah needed to talk to Ellie alone, to confess the London offer and face her guilt. Lila brought the albums, eager to hear more stories. They found Ellie in her garden, pruning roses under the fading light. "Ellie, can we talk?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Ellie nodded, setting her shears down. They sat on the porch, Lila flipping through the albums, asking about a photo of Ellie and George at a dance. Ellie's eyes lit up, her voice warm as she described the night, how George stepped on her toes but made her laugh. Lila grinned, hanging on every word. Sarah took a breath. "Ellie, I need to tell you something. I got a job offer in London. It's big, but it means moving." Ellie's face tightened, but she stayed quiet, waiting. Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "I want it, but I don't want to lose you. I'm so sorry about yesterday." Ellie looked at her, her eyes searching. "You've got dreams, Sarah. I know that. But family's not something you leave behind." Lila listened, her heart sinking. London. She didn't want to move, didn't want to leave Ellie. She held up a photo of Ellie teaching her to ride a bike. "You're my anchor, Grandma. I don't want to go." Ellie's eyes glistened and she pulled Lila close. "You're mine too, honey." Sarah watched, her decision unraveling. She thought of the fair, Ellie's legacy, the family she'd built. London was a dream, but this Ellie Lila Mark was home. She reached for Ellie's hand. "I don't know what I'll do yet, but I'm here now. We'll figure it out." Ellie nodded, a small smile breaking through. The chapter ended with them on the porch, the albums open, stories flowing. Lila texted Mark, urging him to come. The bridge wasn't fully built, but the seeds were planted, fragile but growing, as the stars blinked above Ellie's garden. Please subscribe this channel to get more real story. Lila Thompson woke on July 16, 2025, her mind buzzing with purpose. The past few days had been a whirlwind. Her grandmother Ellie's empty 85th birthday party, the news of her mom's potential move to London, her own runaway to Ellie's house. But yesterday in Ellie's kitchen, surrounded by photo albums and honest words, something had shifted. Lila felt it. A chance to fix what was broken. Today she'd make sure Ellie knew she was loved. She sat at the kitchen table in her parents' house, sketching a plan on a notepad. "We're throwing Grandma a new party," she announced to Sarah and Mark, who were sipping coffee, their faces still heavy with guilt from missing Ellie's birthday. Sarah looked up, her laptop closed for once. "A party?" she asked, hesitant but intrigued. Lila nodded, her dark hair bouncing. "Yeah, Mom. A real one. Everyone comes, us cousins, neighbors. No excuses. Mark set his mug down, a spark in his eyes. She deserves it. I'm in. He'd been quiet since their confrontation at Ellie's, his promise to show up still fresh. Sarah nodded, her guilt softening into determination. Let's do it. Tomorrow at her house. We'll make it special. Lila grinned, already texting Cousin Ruth and Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor who'd been there for Ellie when they hadn't. They brainstormed over breakfast, Lila leading the charge. We need her lemon cake, but we'll bake it. And music, Grandpa's Sinatra records. Sarah suggested inviting the community center folks, remembering the fair's banner honoring Ellie. Mark offered to handle decorations, picturing the balloons Ellie loved. Lila wanted to bring the photo albums, to share Ellie's stories with everyone. She's not just our grandma, Lila said. She's like the town's grandma. Sarah felt a pang, thinking of the London job offer still waiting for her decision. She'd asked Karen for another day, but the deadline was tomorrow night. The job VP of Global Strategy, a life-changing leap, tempted her, but Lila's fire, Mark's resolve, and Ellie's hurt were pulling her back. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the plan. I'll call Ruth, she said, and get the word out at the community center. By noon, the plan was in motion. Lila texted Mia, her best friend, to help with invitations. Ruth called back, her loud voice booming through the phone. Ellie deserves a bash. I'm bringing my potato salad. Mrs. Callahan promised to rally the neighbors, and Mr. Reynolds, the retired librarian, offered to set up a slideshow of Ellie's town contributions. Lila's heart swelled. She'd make this right for Ellie, for all of them. Across town, Ellie was in her garden, pruning roses under the morning sun. She hadn't heard from Lila or Sarah since yesterday's talk, but the locket she'd given Lila felt like a promise kept. She thought of George, his voice in her mind. You're the glue, Ellie. She'd felt unglued after the empty party, but Lila's visit, the family's apologies, had started to mend her. She didn't know about the new party yet, but she felt a quiet hope, like a seed taking root. Lila spent the afternoon at the community center, helping Mr. Reynolds with the slideshow. Old photos of Ellie flashed on the screen, organizing town cleanups, planting the community garden, dancing at fairs. Lila's chest tightened with pride. She texted Ellie. Can I come by tomorrow? Got a surprise. Ellie replied. Always welcome, honey. Lila smiled, the plan feeling real. Sarah and Mark stayed up late, baking a lemon cake from Ellie's recipe, laughing as flour dusted their faces. It was the first time in months they worked together, no phones, no distractions. Sarah thought of London, the folder still unopened on her desk. She'd decide tomorrow after the party. For now, she wanted to show Ellie she was here. Sarah woke early on July 17th, the day of the party, her mind a tangle of nerves and resolve. The London offer folder sat on her nightstand, its weight heavier than its pages. She dreamed of leading global teams, of a life beyond this small town. But the past few days, Ellie's empty table, Lila's rebellion, Mark's guilt, had shifted something in her. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and opened the folder one last time. The numbers were staggering. Double her salary, a relocation package, a chance to reshape the tech industry. But the cost was clear now. Leaving Ellie, uprooting Lila, straining her marriage. She thought of Ellie's words on the porch. Family's a choice. Sarah had chosen work too often, letting deadlines eclipse Sunday dinners, forgetting Ellie's birthday. She didn't want to choose that way anymore. She drove to the office, needing to face Karen in person. The corporate building gleamed, all glass and ambition, but it felt cold today. Karen greeted her, expectant. So, Sarah, London? Sarah took a breath, her voice steady. I'm grateful, Karen, but I'm staying here. My family needs me. Karen's face fell, but she nodded. You're sure? Sarah smiled, a weight lifting. I am. Back home, Sarah felt lighter, like she'd shed a skin. She told Mark over coffee, her words rushed. I said no to London. I want us here with your mom, with Lila. Mark pulled her into a hug, his relief palpable. You did the right thing. We'll make it work. Sarah nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She thought of Ellie's garden, the roses that endured. She'd endured too, rooted here. At Ellie's house, Ellie was tidying the kitchen, unaware of the party being planned. She found the locket's empty box, smiling at the memory of giving it to Lila. She thought of her life, raising Mark, loving George, building this town. The empty party had hurt, but yesterday's talk, Lila's spark, had reminded her of her worth. She wasn't invisible, not to those who mattered. Lila arrived mid-morning, bursting with energy. "Grandma, we're throwing you a party today," she blurted, unable to keep the secret. Ellie's eyes widened, then softened. "Oh honey, you didn't have to." Lila grinned. "We want to. Everyone's coming." Ellie's heart swelled. She hadn't expected this, but it felt like George's hand on her shoulder, guiding her back to joy. Sarah and Mark joined them, bringing the lemon cake still warm. Ellie laughed, touching the frosting. "You got the zest right," she said, her eyes bright. Sarah hesitated, then spoke. "Ellie, I turned down the London job. We're staying." Ellie's face lit up, her hand finding Sarah's. "You chose us," she said softly. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I chose family." Lila hugged Ellie, the locket gleaming at her neck. The house felt alive again, the silence gone. Ellie looked at them, her son, her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, and felt whole. The party hadn't started, but the celebration had already begun. By noon, Ellie's house was buzzing with preparations. Mrs. Callahan arrived with her fruit salad, Mr. Reynolds with the slideshow equipment. Cousin Ruth burst in, her potato salad in tow, her voice booming. "Ellie, this is gonna be a bash," she declared, hugging her tight. Ellie laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in days. The community was coming just as Lila had planned. The backyard was transformed. Tables set with Ellie's good china, red and gold balloons tied to the trellis George had built. Mark strung fairy lights, his hands steady, a quiet promise in his work. Sarah helped Mrs. Callahan arrange food. Her corporate polish swapped for flour-dusted jeans. Lila ran between tasks, her phone forgotten, her energy infectious. At the community center, word had spread. Neighbors, old friends, even the mayor showed up, drawn by Ellie's legacy. Mr. Reynolds set up the slideshow in the backyard, photos of Ellie's life flashing. Planting the community garden, leading town events, smiling with George. People whispered, "That's Ellie Thompson," their voices full of pride. Lila watched, her chest swelling. Her grandma was a legend. Ellie moved through the crowd, greeting faces she hadn't seen in years. The young mother from the fair thanked her again for the recipe. A teenager showed her a rose cutting he'd grown from her advice. Ellie felt George's presence, his laugh in the air. She wasn't just a widow, a mother, a grandmother. She was a thread woven into this town. Sarah watched Ellie, her decision cemented. Turning down London had been hard, but this, Ellie's smile, Lila's joy, Mark's effort, was worth it. She thought of her own mother, long gone, and how Ellie had filled that role. She'd never let that go again. Mark stood by the trellis watching his mom. He remembered her strength after George's death, how she'd kept them together. He drifted, but now he was here building something new. He caught Lila's eye and she grinned, pointing to the slideshow. "Look, Dad, Grandma's a rock star." Mark nodded, his heart full. As the sun dipped, the backyard filled with voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. Ellie stood by the roses, her blue dress catching the light. She felt seen, not just by her family but by the town she'd helped build. The party was starting, and it was already more than she'd dreamed. The party kicked off as the sky turned pink. Sinatra's voice drifting from the record player Lila had set up. "Fly Me to the Moon" filled the air and Ellie swayed, her eyes bright with memory. Lila grabbed her hand, pulling her into a clumsy dance. "Come on, Grandma," she laughed and Ellie followed, her steps light despite her age. The crowd cheered, neighbors joining in, the backyard alive with movement. Sarah and Mark served the lemon cake, their hands brushing as they passed plates. Ruth's potato salad was a hit, despite her insistence on adding too much dill. Mrs. Callahan's fruit salad, watery as ever, made Ellie chuckle. She'd eat it anyway, for love. The slideshow looped, showing Ellie's life in flashes, each photo a story the crowd begged to hear. Lila took the makeshift stage, a picnic table, holding up an album. "This is my grandma," she said, her voice carrying. "She's taught me who I am." She shared a story from the albums about Ellie and George's first dance, and the crowd listened, rapt. Ellie's eyes glistened. She hadn't expected Lila to do this, to make her feel so seen. Sarah stepped up, her voice nervous but clear. Ellie, we failed you on your birthday. But you're our heart and we're here now. The crowd murmured, nodding, and Ellie reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it. Mark joined them, his arm around Lila. Mom, you're the glue. Always have been. Ellie smiled, tears falling. You're here now, she said. That's enough. The party grew chaotic. Kids ran through the garden, neighbors swapped stories, Ruth spilled wine on the tablecloth. But it was perfect, messy, real. Ellie sat with Lila, sharing the locket story, how George had given it to her when Mark was born. Lila clutched it, promising to keep it close. Sarah watched, her heart settled. London was gone, but this was home. Mark danced with Ellie, his steps awkward but earnest. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. She nodded, her hand on his cheek. You're here, Mark. That's what matters. The music shifted to My Way, and the crowd sang along, their voices rising into the night. As the party wound down, Ellie sat on the porch, the fairy lights glowing above. Lila curled up beside her, the albums in her lap. Sarah and Ascend Mark joined them, the neighbors lingering, their laughter fading into the night. The lemon cake was half-eaten, the roses swaying in the breeze. Ellie felt full. Not just of cake, but of love, connection, the family she'd fought to keep. She looked at Lila, her spark, and thought of the locket, a symbol of roots. You did this, she told Lila, her voice soft. You brought us together. Lila blushed, leaning into her. You made it easy, Grandma. Sarah sat on the other side, her hand finding Ellie's. We're staying, she said again, the words a vow. We're family. Mark helped clean up, stacking plates, his movements deliberate. He thought of his dad, how he'd loved these nights, the house full of life. Mark had drifted, but he'd found his way back. He hugged Ellie, whispering, I love you, Mom. She hugged him back, her heart light. The neighbors left, promising to visit soon. Ruth hugged Ellie, her voice loud but warm. You're a treasure, Ellie. Mr. Reynolds packed up the slideshow, his eyes kind. The community had shown up, just as her family had, proving her worth wasn't tied to one empty day, but to a lifetime of love. Ellie stood, addressing the last guests. Thank you, she said, her voice strong. You've made me feel 85 years young. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Lila squeezed her hand, the locket gleaming. The stars were out, George's presence in the air, and Ellie felt whole. The chapter closed with the family on the porch, the albums open, stories flowing. Sarah's decision was made, Mark's promise kept, Lila's